Hi, I'm Ellie. My mom slapped my newborn baby at Christmas dinner. Everyone froze in shock. She sneered, "That child is too noisy for this family." When I tried to protect my son, she slapped me too, then threw us both out into the snow. 20 minutes later, my husband's military convoy pulled up, and what happened next left my entire family speechless. Want to guess who my husband really was? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I arrived at my parents' Christmas dinner wearing a cream sweater dress I'd bought on clearance during a chilly autumn afternoon in Colorado Springs. It was simple, festive with subtle gold threading, and about the only nice thing in my closet. That still fit my postpartum body. The snow outside the windows of my childhood home was falling heavily, casting a soft white glow across the manicured lawn. The scent of roast turkey and cinnamon apple pie floated through the air. And expensive. Wine everywhere. Someone was handing someone else a crystal glass of it. No one offered me one. A server walked right past without a glance, though he nodded respectfully to my sister. Relatives gathered in designer outfits, cashmere sweaters, and jewelry that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I caught my reflection in one of the ornate mirrors hanging in the hallway. Wind-tossed hair pulled into a messy bun, minimal makeup, dark circles under my eyes from weeks of midnight feedings. I looked like someone who'd been invited by mistake. My mother spotted me from across the crowded living room and made a calculated approach, lips pursed, eyes narrowing as if she were inspecting damaged goods. "You look," she paused, gaze sweeping from my sensible flats up to my unadorned neck, "presentable enough, I suppose." That was it. No hug. No, "How was your drive through the blizzard?" Not even a nod to the fact that I'd brought my 6-week-old son to meet his grandmother for the first time. I barely got a word in before she walked off to greet my cousin with a tighter dress and a higher-paying job. My sister Caroline didn't notice me at all or pretended not to. She was too busy showing off her engagement ring to our aunts near the fireplace, one hand clutching a glass of champagne, the other extended dramatically to display the 3-carat diamond her investment banker fiancé had given her. She wore a red silk dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my husband's military salary. When her eyes finally met mine, there was no warmth, just polite acknowledgement that disappeared as quickly as it came. We'd barely spoken since I'd married James instead of the doctor my parents had tried to set me up with. I wandered around the edge of the gathering, trying to soothe my fussing baby while pretending I wasn't being deliberately ignored. I hadn't come to cause a scene. I'd come because despite everything, they were still my family, and I wanted my son to know his grandparents. And then my husband called. My phone vibrated softly in my pocket as I bounced little Noah in my arms. I stepped into the quieter hallway to answer. "Hey," James's voice came through, distorted by distance and what sounded like wind. "How's it going?" "About as well as expected," I whispered, not wanting to be overheard. "Mom hasn't even acknowledged Noah exists. Dad's been hiding in his study. Caroline's treating me like I'm invisible." "I'm sorry, babe," he said, and I could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "I wish I could be there with you." "Me too," I said, my throat tightening. "When are you coming home?" There was a pause, and for a moment I thought we'd lost connection. "That's actually why I'm calling," he finally said. "There's been a change of plans. I can't say much, but, Ellie." My mother's sharp voice cut through the hallway. "We're about to sit down. Get in here and put that baby somewhere quiet." I closed my eyes briefly. "I have to go. Call me when you can." "I love you," James said. "And remember what we talked about. You're stronger than you think." I ended the call and took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked back into the living room, Noah cradled against my chest. The dining room table had been extended to its full length, gleaming with crystal and silver under the chandelier light. Everyone was finding their assigned seats, directed by my mother's immaculate calligraphy on cream place cards. I searched for mine, walking slowly around the table, checking each card. Nothing. I approached my mother, who was adjusting a centerpiece of pine and holly. "Mom, I can't find my place card." She didn't look up. "You and the baby will be in the sunroom. There's a small table set up." I blinked. "The sunroom? But that's where you put the coats and purses." "Well, we can't have the baby disrupting dinner, can we?" She finally looked at me, her expression cool. "Unless you've finally hired a nanny like I suggested." "He's 6 weeks old, Mom. I'm not leaving him with a nanny." My father emerged from his study, nodding briefly in my direction before taking his place at the head of the table. He hadn't even asked to see his grandson. My sister smirked as she slid into the chair that should have been mine, by tradition, as the eldest daughter. I stood there, Noah beginning to fuss against my shoulder, while 20 pairs of eyes carefully avoided looking at me. My chest tightened with a familiar ache, the same one I'd felt when they'd refused to attend my wedding because James was just a soldier and not the successful businessman they'd picked out for me. Fine, I said quietly, turning toward the sunroom. It was colder there, away from the main heating vents, with windows on 3 sides letting in the chill of the December night. A small folding table had been set up next to a pile of designer coats and handbags. One plate, no silverware, no place card. Just an afterthought. Noah began to cry in earnest now, his little face reddening as I tried to soothe him. I bounced him gently, whispering softly in his ear, but he was hungry and uncomfortable in the cold room. I fumbled with my nursing cover, trying to feed him. While perched on the edge of a decorative chair that wasn't meant for sitting. Through the open doorway, I could hear the laughter and conversation from the dining room. The clinking of glasses for a toast. My father's voice rising above the others as he celebrated Caroline's engagement, the family business's record year, and the new vacation home they'd purchased in Aspen. Not a word about his grandson. Not a word about me. Noah's cries grew louder. Despite my best efforts to calm him. I knew that sound, he was overstimulated, tired, and the cold room wasn't helping. I got up and walked back toward the dining room, intending to ask for a blanket or permission to move to a warmer space. I stood in the doorway, waiting for a break in conversation to speak. But before I could open my mouth, my mother's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing at the sound of Noah's crying. "Ellie," she hissed, "take that baby somewhere else. We're trying to have a civilized dinner." "He's cold, Mom. The sunroom is freezing." I told you bringing an infant was inappropriate," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is exactly why we suggested the nanny." Noah's cries intensified, his little body tense in my arms. I felt tears threatening. But blinked them back. "He's your grandson. He's family too." My father cleared his throat. "Ellie, please respect your mother's wishes. We have guests." I looked around the table at my family. Aunts and uncles who had sent expensive baby gifts but never visited. Cousins who had excluded me from their social media once I'd married down. My sister, who hadn't even asked her nephew's name. "I just need a warmer place for him," I said. My voice growing stronger. "He's a baby, not an inconvenience you can hide away." My mother stood up abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "Always the dramatic one," she said coldly. "Always thinking the rules don't apply to you." She strode toward me, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. I instinctively stepped back, but she was already reaching for Noah. "Give him to me," she demanded. "I'll put him upstairs where he won't bother anyone." "No," I said firmly, turning slightly to shield him from her grasp. "He stays with me." That's when it happened. Noah let out a particularly loud wail, and my mother's hand shot out, not toward me, but toward him. A sharp slap landed on his blanket-wrapped leg. "Stop that noise right now," she snapped. The room went silent. Even Noah seemed shocked into momentary quiet. I stared at my mother in disbelief, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. "You hit him," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You hit my baby." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "I barely touched him. He needs to learn discipline early." Something broke inside me then, a dam I'd built years ago to contain all the hurt and disappointment they'd caused me. "He's 6 weeks old," I shouted, no longer caring who heard. "You don't hit babies. You don't hit children at all." My father stood up now, his face reddening. "Lower your voice, Ellie. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. My mother just slapped my newborn son, and I'm the one making a scene? Noah had started crying again, and I held him closer, whispering soft reassurances even as my own heart raced. My mother's face was a mask of cold fury. "That's enough," she said. "You've always been difficult, always been defiant. You threw away a perfectly good match with Dr. Harrison for that soldier. And now you bring this crying brat to ruin our Christmas dinner." "His name is Noah," I said, my voice steadier now. "And his father is a good man. A better man than anyone sitting at this table." My mother's hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. The slap stung my cheek, the sound cracking through the shocked silence. My sister gasped. Someone dropped a fork. "Get out," my mother said, her voice deadly quiet. "Get out of my house right now." I stood frozen for a moment, my cheek burning. Noah clutched protectively against my chest. 20 years of trying to earn their approval, of making myself smaller to fit their expectations, of hoping someday they would love me as I was, all of it crystallized in that moment of clarity. "Gladly," I finally said. I turned to the silent table. "Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope you enjoy your civilized dinner." I walked steadily to the sunroom, gathered Noah's diaper bag and my coat, and headed for the front door. No one followed me. No one called my name. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a final sounding thud, and I stepped out into the swirling snow. The temperature had dropped further, the wind biting through my thin dress. I had parked at the far end of the circular driveway, and now I struggled through ankle-deep snow, trying to shield Noah from the cold. He was wailing again, confused and frightened by the sharp temperature change and the tension radiating from me. I fumbled with my keys, fingers stiff with cold, and finally managed to unlock the car. I placed Noah carefully in his car seat, made sure he was secure, then slid into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key into the ignition. That's when the tears finally came, hot and fast, blurring my vision as I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. What had I been thinking, coming here? Why had I believed this time would be different? What kind of mother was I, exposing my son to people who could hurt him so casually? I don't know how long I sat there, but I was startled by a sharp tap on my window. I looked up, expecting to see my father, perhaps sent by my mother to make sure we actually left the property. Instead, I saw headlights. Multiple sets, cutting through the falling snow. Not cars, larger vehicles. And the tapping came again. I wiped my eyes and lowered the window. A familiar face peered in, snow gathering on the brim of his military cap. "Ma'am," he said formally, though his eyes were kind, "Commander Reeves sends his regards and asks if you and the little one would like an escort home." I blinked, confused. "Commander." And then, through the swirling snow, I saw him. James, my husband, striding toward the car in his full dress uniform, metals glinting in the porch light. Behind him, 3 military vehicles were parked. In formation, their engines running, lights blazing. He opened my door, concern written across his face as he saw my tear-streaked cheeks and reddened skin where my mother had slapped me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, kneeling beside the car. "What are you doing here?" I managed. "How?" He smiled, that same gentle smile that had made me fall in love with him 4 years ago. "I told you there was a change of plans. I got leave earlier than expected. When you weren't answering your phone, I figured you might be here." His expression darkened as he touched my cheek gently. "What happened?" I told him, quickly and quietly, about the sunroom, about my mother slapping Noah, then me. His jaw tightened, but he remained calm, his military training evident in his controlled response. "Wait here," he said, standing up. "I need to have a word with your parents." "James, don't," I started, but he was already walking toward the house, his posture straight and commanding. 2 of his officers flanked him, moving with purpose through the snow. I grabbed Noah from his car seat and followed, not willing to let James face my family alone. By the time I reached the front steps, the door was already open. My father stood in the entryway, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. As he took in the sight of James in his full commander's uniform, backed by uniformed officers. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded. "You can't just, sir," James cut him off, his voice carrying the authority of his rank. "I understand there was an incident involving my wife and son. I'd like to discuss it with you and Mrs. Blake." My mother appeared behind my father, her face paling as she saw the military vehicles in her driveway. "Who are these people?" she hissed. "What will the neighbors think?" James stepped forward, and something in his demeanor made my father move aside. "Mrs. Blake, I'm Commander James Reeves, United States Army Special Forces. I understand you struck my infant son and then assaulted my wife." The color drained completely from my mother's face. "Commander?" she repeated weakly. My sister appeared in the hallway behind them, along with several dinner guests, drawn by the commotion. Caroline's eyes widened as she took in James's uniform, the medals, the officers standing at attention behind him. "Yes, ma'am," James continued, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I've recently been promoted to commander of the 10th Special Forces Group. I've just returned from a classified operation overseas, and I came straight here to collect my family." My father's expression shifted subtly. I knew that look. He was recalculating, reassessing the value of the connection standing before him. "Commander Reeves," he said, his tone notably more respectful, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding. If you'd like to come in, we can discuss this like civilized." "With all due respect, sir," James interrupted, "I've seen the mark on my wife's face, and I've heard what happened to my son. There's no misunderstanding." He turned to me, his eyes softening. "Ellie, is there anything you need from inside?" I shook my head, holding Noah close. The baby had quieted now, soothed by the steady rhythm of my heartbeat and James's familiar voice. James nodded, then turned back to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Blake, I want to be very clear. My family, my wife and son, are my priority. How you've treated them is unacceptable." My mother found her voice again. "Now see here, young man. This is a family matter, and you have no right to come to my home with this military display and make accusations." James didn't raise his voice, but somehow it seemed to fill the entryway. When you struck my child and assaulted my wife, Mrs. Blake, you made it my concern. And as for this military display, my team and I were en route to an official function when I received word that my family needed me. The mention of an official function wasn't lost on my father, whose eyes darted to the officers standing behind James. One of them, a stern-looking woman with captain's bars, nodded almost imperceptibly. Ellie has always been dramatic, my mother tried again, but her voice lacked conviction. She's exaggerating what happened. I saw the mark on her face myself, ma'am, said the female officer, stepping forward. And as a mother myself, I find the idea of striking an infant unconscionable. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The dinner guests were whispering now, shocked expressions on their faces. My sister looked like she wanted to disappear. James turned to me again. Are you ready to go home? I nodded, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. James placed a protective arm around me and Noah, and together we turned toward the door. Wait, my father called. Ellie, you can't just leave like this. It's Christmas Eve. I paused and looked back at him. Yes, it is Christmas Eve. And instead of welcoming your daughter and grandson, you put us in a cold room and looked the other way when Mom struck a newborn baby. So yes, I can leave like this. The silence was deafening. For the first time in my life, my father seemed at a loss for words. We walked out into the snowy night, James's arm steady around me. The officers fell into step behind us, a silent honor guard escorting us to the waiting vehicles. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the promotion, James said quietly as we reached the lead vehicle, a black SUV with government plates. I wanted to surprise you when I got home. I laughed softly, despite everything. Well, you certainly surprised my family. He helped me into the passenger seat, making sure Noah was secure in my arms. I didn't mean to make a scene, he said, looking concerned. When Sergeant Miller called and said you weren't answering your phone and he could hear a baby crying in the background, I needed to make sure you were both okay. You didn't make a scene, I assured him, reaching for his hand. You stood up for us. No one's ever done that before. As James closed my door and walked around to the driver's side, I glanced back at the house. My parents and sister stood in the doorway, watching. They looked smaller somehow, less imposing than they had my entire life. James started the engine, and the convoy began to move down the driveway. As we pulled away, I noticed my mother step forward slightly, one hand raised as if to wave, or perhaps to call us back. But it was too late. We were already gone. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in clean white as we drove away from my childhood home. Noah had fallen asleep in my arms, his little face peaceful. James reached over and squeezed my hand. Merry Christmas, Ellie, he said softly. Let's go home. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where home was. It wasn't in that imposing house with its perfect decorations and cold hearts. It was right here, in this military vehicle, with my husband and son beside me. It was in the love that had brought James rushing to my side when I needed him most. It was in the tiny hands of our son, who deserved better than the legacy of coldness and conditional love my parents had tried to pass down. As we drove through the snowy streets, I felt something inside me shift and settle. The weight of trying to earn my family's approval, of never being enough, slipped away like snow melting in sunshine. In its place was something stronger, something real. I looked at James, this man who had seen me at my worst and still thought I was worth fighting for. This man who commanded respect not through fear or manipulation, but through integrity and service. I love you, I said simply. He smiled, his eyes never leaving the road. I love you too. Both of you. More than anything. And that, I realized, was the difference. My parents loved the idea of a perfect daughter who would make the right connections, marry the right man, and bring prestige to their name. James loved me, the real me, with all my flaws and strengths. As we left the exclusive neighborhood behind, Noah stirred in my arms, his tiny hand grasping my finger. I looked down at his perfect face and made a silent promise. He would never know the cold rejection I had grown up with. He would be loved completely, just as he was. The convoy turned onto the highway, heading toward our modest home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't grand or impressive like my parents' house. The furniture was mostly second-hand, and the decorations were simple. But it was warm. It was real. It was ours. What are you thinking about? James asked, glancing over at me. I'm thinking about tomorrow, I said. Noah's first Christmas. James smiled. It's going to be perfect. And I knew he was right, not because everything would go according to some carefully orchestrated plan, but because we would be together. Because love, real love, would fill every corner of our home. As the military vehicles escorted us through the quiet, snow-covered streets, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly the people you're meant to be with. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be midnight feedings and diaper changes. There would be the lingering sting of my mother's rejection. There might even be awkward phone calls or attempts at reconciliation. But tonight, as James drove us home through the gently falling snow, none of that mattered. What mattered was this moment. This new beginning. This family we had created, bound not by obligation or expectation, but by love. I looked out at the winter night, at the Christmas lights twinkling from houses we passed, and felt a surge of gratitude. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages. Sometimes you have to lose what you thought you wanted to find what you truly need. As we pulled into our driveway, the house James and I had scraped and saved to buy, I saw the simple wreath on our door, the single string of lights along the porch rail. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was honest. Like us. James helped me out of the SUV, his strong hands gentle as he supported Noah and me through the freshly fallen snow. The wind had died down, leaving the world in a hushed stillness, broken only by the soft crunch of boots on snow and the quiet rumble of military engines idling in our driveway. "Commander," called a voice from the second vehicle. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped out, holding a stack of wrapped packages. "The team put these together for the little one. We were going to drop them off tomorrow, but since we're here." James nodded, his face softening with gratitude. "Thank you, Lieutenant. And thank the team. This means a lot." I watched in amazement as several officers emerged from the vehicles, each carrying gifts or bags of groceries. One woman, Captain Chen, according to her nameplate, approached with a beautiful handmade quilt. "My grandmother made this when she heard about Noah," she explained, her normally stern face breaking into a gentle smile. "She said every baby needs something made with love." Tears pricked my eyes, but these were different from the ones I'd shed in my parents' driveway. These were tears of gratitude, of belonging. "I don't know what to say," I managed, holding Noah close as the wind picked up again. "Let's get you inside first," James said, guiding me toward our front door as the team efficiently unloaded their offerings. "It's freezing out here." Our modest home welcomed us with the lingering scent of the cinnamon candles I'd lit before leaving that morning, a lifetime ago, it seemed now. James flicked on the lights, illuminating our small living room with its second-hand furniture and the tiny Christmas tree we decorated together before he was deployed. The contrast between this warm, humble space and my parents' cold, perfectly decorated mansion couldn't have been more striking. Here, every item told a story of our life together: the crocheted throw blanket from James's grandmother, the mismatched coffee mugs we'd collected from various duty stations, the framed ultrasound picture of Noah that still held pride of place on our mantle. Lieutenant Rodriguez and the others quickly but respectfully brought in the gifts and supplies, placing them under our tree and stocking our refrigerator. They moved with military efficiency but also with obvious care, keeping their voices low, so as not to disturb Noah, who had miraculously remained asleep through the transition. "Ma'am," Captain Chen said, approaching me as I settled on our worn but comfortable couch, "we've arranged for meals to be delivered for the next week." The battalion spouses support group organized it when they heard the commander was getting leave to come home for Christmas. I blinked in surprise, looking up at James. He shrugged, a slightly embarrassed smile on his face. "I may have mentioned once or twice that you were doing everything on your own with a newborn." "Once or twice?" Lieutenant Rodriguez chuckled. "Commander hasn't stopped talking about his wife and son since he got the news about Noah's birth. Showed us so many pictures we could probably pick the little guy out of a lineup." A warmth spread through my chest, so different from the cold knot that had been there earlier at my parents' house. These people, many of whom I'd never even met, had shown more care for me and my son in 20 minutes than my own family had in years. After making sure we had everything we needed, the team prepared to leave. Each of them took a moment to offer quiet congratulations to James about Noah, to thank him for his leadership, to express their relief at having him home safely. Their respect for him was obvious, but it wasn't the fearful deference my father commanded from his employees. This was something earned through integrity and genuine concern. As the last of the vehicles pulled away, their taillights disappearing into the snowy night, James closed the door and leaned against it with a long exhale. "So," he said, his eyes finding mine. "Not exactly the Christmas Eve I had planned." I laughed softly, careful not to disturb Noah. "Me neither." James crossed the room and sat beside me, his arm slipping around my shoulders as he gazed down at our sleeping son. "I'm sorry about your parents, Ellie. I know you were hoping things would be different this time." I leaned into his solid warmth, letting the events of the day settle around me. "I've been hoping that my whole life," I admitted. "But tonight I finally stopped." He pressed a kiss to my temple, his presence grounding me as it always had. Want to talk about what happened? Before I showed up, I mean. I took a deep breath and told him everything: the cold reception, the sunroom by the coats, my mother's harsh words, the slap that still seemed impossible to believe. As I spoke, James's arm tightened around me, but he remained silent, letting me get it all out. She hit him, James, I finally whispered, looking down at Noah's peaceful face. She hit our baby. How could anyone do that? I don't know, he said honestly. I've seen a lot of things in combat zones that make more sense to me than what happened tonight. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and Noah's gentle breathing. You know what the worst part is? I finally said. Part of me is still wondering what I did wrong. If I had dressed better, or if Noah had been quieter, or if I'd just accepted the sunroom without complaint. Stop, James said firmly, turning to face me. This isn't on you, Ellie. It never was. Your parents have been manipulating you your entire life, making you feel like you're never good enough. But the problem was never you. It was them. I knew he was right, but decades of conditioning don't disappear in an instant. They're still my parents, I said quietly. And now I've completely burned that bridge. You didn't burn anything, James countered. They poured the gasoline and lit the match a long time ago. Tonight was just the moment you stopped trying to put out their fire. Noah stirred in my arms, his tiny face scrunching before relaxing again. I adjusted the blanket around him, marveling at how perfectly he fit against me. I should probably put him down, I said, though I was reluctant to let him go. James nodded and stood, offering his hand to help me up. Together we walked to the nursery, a small room we'd painted pale blue and decorated with stars and clouds. The crib had been a splurge, but James had insisted on getting the safest model we could afford. I gently laid Noah down, watching as he settled into the soft mattress. James stood beside me, his arm around my waist, both of us just watching our son breathe for a long moment. He's perfect, James whispered. You've done an amazing job with him while I was away. The simple acknowledgement brought fresh tears to my eyes. All evening I'd been craving just a word of recognition from my family, some small indication that they saw my efforts, that they were proud of me. Instead, that validation had come from James, as it always did. I missed you so much, I admitted, turning into his embrace. Every day. He held me tightly, his chin resting on top of my head. I missed you too. Both of you. There were nights I couldn't sleep because I was so worried about you doing this alone. I wasn't totally alone, I said. Sarah from next door helped a lot. And your mom called every week to check on us. James smiled. She told me. Said you were handling everything like a champion. We stood there in the soft glow of the night light, holding each other, the quiet intimacy of the moment washing away some of the pain from earlier. Are you hungry? James asked eventually. I noticed you didn't get to eat at your parents' house. My stomach rumbled in response, and I realized I hadn't eaten since lunch. Starving, actually. We made our way back to the kitchen, where James insisted I sit while he reheated the pasta Sarah had brought over the day before. It was such a simple thing, being taken care of after weeks of doing everything myself, but it nearly undid me. As we ate at our small kitchen table, the conversation shifted to James's deployment and his unexpected promotion. Why didn't you tell me about becoming a commander? I asked, twirling pasta around my fork. That's huge, James. He shrugged, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his way of downplaying his accomplishments. It happened quickly. General Hayes called me into his office 3 weeks ago, said they needed someone to take over the 10th after Colonel Mackenzie was injured. It was supposed to be temporary, but apparently I impressed someone. Of course you did, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. You're an incredible leader. Everyone can see that. He smiled, a touch of color rising in his cheeks. The promotion comes with a pay raise, he said. And better housing allowance. We could look for a bigger place, maybe something closer to the base. I glanced around our small kitchen, at the chipped countertops and outdated appliances. I like our house, I said. It's home. It is, he agreed. But with Noah growing, we might want more space eventually. And I know the commute has been hard on you. The thoughtfulness of his words struck me. Here was a man who had just returned from a combat deployment, who had confronted my toxic family, who had every right to be focused on his own needs, and instead, he was thinking about making my life easier. We can talk about it after the holidays, I suggested. Right now, I'm just happy to have you home. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where James insisted on building a fire in our rarely used fireplace. The warmth soon filled the small space, creating a cozy haven against the cold night outside. I have something for you, James said, reaching behind the couch to pull out a small, wrapped package. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but I think you could use it tonight. I took the gift, touched by his thoughtfulness. I didn't think you'd have time to shop while deployed. I didn't, he admitted. I ordered this before I left. Asked Lieutenant Rodriguez to pick it up and wrap it for me. I carefully unwrapped the small box, lifting the lid to find a delicate silver locket nestled against black velvet. When I opened it, I gasped softly. Inside was a tiny photo of Noah on one side, and on the other, a picture of James in his uniform. So we're always with you, he explained, taking the necklace and moving behind me to fasten it around my neck. Even when we're apart. The locket rested just above my heart, its weight both substantial and comforting. I touched it gently, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It's perfect, I whispered. Thank you. We sat together on the couch, the fire crackling, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly in the corner. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but in here, we were warm and safe and together. Tell me about the first time you held him, James said, his voice soft with wonder. What did it feel like? I smiled, remembering the moment that had changed everything. It was like the whole world shifted. Like suddenly everything made sense in a way it never had before. I leaned against his shoulder. I kept thinking about how I wished you were there, but also how proud you would be when you finally met him. I am proud, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Of both of you. I can't imagine anything braver than what you've done these past weeks. His words washed over me like a healing balm. All my life, I'd been told I wasn't enough, not accomplished enough, not polished enough, not the right kind of daughter. But here, in this moment, I was exactly who I needed to be. The baby monitor on the coffee table lit up with soft sounds of Noah stirring. James immediately sat straighter. I've got him, he said, standing up before I could move. You rest. I watched as he navigated to the nursery, listening through the monitor as he spoke softly to our son. Hey there, little man. Dad's here now. Let's let mommy rest a bit, okay? Tears filled my eyes again, but these were different, tears of gratitude, of joy, of the profound realization that this was what family was supposed to be. Not performance and perfection, but support and love, especially when things got messy. James returned carrying Noah, who had settled against his father's broad chest, tiny fingers curled around the fabric of his shirt. He recognized me, James said, wonder in his voice. I swear he did. He looked right at me and stopped crying. Of course he did, I said, making room for them on the couch. I've been showing him your picture every day. Telling him stories. About his brave dad. James sat beside me, Noah secure in his arms, and for a long while we just existed together in the quiet warmth of our home. No judgments, no expectations, just love in its purest form. What your mother did today, James, said eventually, his voice low and serious, it stops with her. That cycle of coldness, of conditional love, it ends now. Noah will never doubt that he's loved exactly as he is. I nodded, laying my head on his shoulder. I know. And you, he continued, you deserve that same unconditional love. You always have. The words sank deep into places that had been hollow for too long. Maybe it was the emotional exhaustion of the day, or the relief of having James home, or simply the truth finally breaking through years of carefully constructed defenses, but something inside me finally accepted what he was saying. I deserved better than what my parents had given me. I always had. The realization didn't come with anger or bitterness, just a quiet certainty that settled in my bones. And with it came a sense of freedom I'd never known before, freedom from the endless striving, from the constant need to prove myself worthy of love. I know who I am now, I said softly. I'm Noah's mother. I'm your wife. And that's enough. James smiled, his eyes reflecting the firelight. It's more than enough. It's everything. Noah made a small sound, and we both looked down to see him watching us with wide, curious eyes. James adjusted him so he could see both our faces. Hey there, little guy, he said. Merry Christmas Eve. Your first one, can you believe it? Noah's tiny hand reached up, grasping at the air between us. I offered my finger, and he gripped it with surprising strength. Strong like his father, I murmured. Determined like his mother, James countered with a smile. The fire popped and crackled, casting dancing shadows across the walls of our small living room. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. The Christmas tree lights reflected in the window, creating the illusion of stars brought down to earth. In that moment, the pain of the evening at my parents' house seemed distant, almost belonging to another lifetime. What remained was this perfect, quiet moment with the family I had chosen, the family that had chosen me back. We should probably try to get some sleep, I said reluctantly. He'll be up again in a few hours. James nodded but made no move to get up. In a minute, he said. I want to remember this. Right here, right now. This is what I thought about over there. What kept me going on the hardest days. I understood completely. After years of feeling like I was never quite where I belonged, never quite who I was supposed to be, I had finally found my place in the world. It wasn't in my parents' exclusive neighborhood or in the circles they had always pushed me toward. It was here, in this modest home, with this man who saw my worth without question, and this child who had shown me what unconditional love truly meant. "Merry Christmas, James," I whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly. "Merry Christmas, Ellie," he replied. "The first of many. I promise." As if in agreement, Noah made a soft cooing sound, his eyes drifting closed as sleep reclaimed him. James and I exchanged a smile over his head, the kind of private communication that comes from sharing your heart with someone who treasures it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be difficult conversations about boundaries. With my family, decisions to be made about the future, the everyday work of building a life together. But tonight, in the warm glow of firelight and Christmas magic, none of that mattered. What mattered was this moment. This peace. This love. That asked for nothing in return but offered everything freely. I touched the locket around my neck, feeling its gentle weight against my skin. A reminder that I was never alone, even in the moments when it felt like the whole world had turned away. Outside our window, a military vehicle remained parked at the curb, a security detail James hadn't mentioned but I had noticed. Even now, he was protecting us, ensuring our safety in ways both seen and unseen. "Your team really respects you," I said quietly, careful not to wake Noah. "I could see it in the way they look at you." James looked slightly embarrassed. "They're good people. The best. We've been through a lot together." "They're like family," I observed. He nodded. "In a way, yes. A different kind of family than what we have here, but important." I thought about that, about the different kinds of families we create throughout our lives. The ones we're born into, the ones we choose, the ones that form around shared experiences and mutual respect. For so long, I'd believed that family meant only one thing, the rigid, conditional relationship I'd grown up with. But tonight had shown me that family could be something else entirely. It could be James's team bringing groceries and handmade quilts. It could be Sarah from next door checking on me every day while James was deployed. It could be the bond between a father and the son he was meeting for the first time. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. James smiled, his arm tightening around me. "More than okay," he promised. "We're going to be extraordinary." And as Noah slept peacefully between us, as the fire burned low in the grate, as the clock ticked toward midnight and Christmas Day, I believed him. For the first time in my life, I truly believed that I was exactly where I was meant to be, with exactly the people I was meant to be with. The wounds from my childhood wouldn't heal overnight. The pain of my mother's rejection wouldn't simply disappear. But I was no longer alone with that pain. I had a partner who understood, who supported me, who loved me not in spite of my imperfections, but because of the strength it took to keep going despite them. And I had a son who deserved to know that love shouldn't hurt, that family should be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. For him, I would break the cycle. For him, I would learn to love myself the way I loved him, completely, unconditionally, without reservation. As the clock struck midnight, marking the official start of Christmas Day, James leaned over and kissed my forehead. "I love you," he whispered. "All of you, exactly as you are." And in those simple words was everything I had ever needed to hear. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across our living room. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented to find myself on the couch rather than in bed. Noah was no longer between us. James must have put him back in his crib at some point. My husband slept beside me, his face relaxed in sleep, one protective arm still draped across my waist. Christmas morning. Noah's first. And James was home. I carefully extricated myself from his embrace, padding quietly to the kitchen to start coffee. The events of the previous night came flooding back, my mother's harsh words, the shocking slap, being thrown out into the snow. But instead of the familiar ache of rejection, I felt something different this morning. Something lighter. The coffee had just finished brewing when my phone vibrated on the counter. I glanced at the screen and froze. My sister Caroline's name flashed across the display. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice low to avoid waking James. "Ellie." Caroline's voice sounded strange, strained and uncertain. I need to talk to you." I leaned against the counter, coffee forgotten. "I'm listening." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of her breathing. "What Mom did last night was wrong," she finally said. "Hitting Noah. Hitting you. All of it." The admission surprised me. Caroline had always been our mother's perfect reflection, never questioning, never challenging. Why are you calling, Caroline? I asked, not unkindly, but warily. Another pause. Because I couldn't sleep. Because I kept seeing your face when Mom slapped you. Because. Her voice caught. Because I'm pregnant, and I couldn't stop thinking about someone treating my baby that way. The news hit me like a physical force. My sister, pregnant. About to embark on the same journey I had just begun. Congratulations, I said, unsure what else to offer. I'm scared, Ellie, she admitted, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I'm scared I'll be like her. I'm scared I don't know how to be any other way. The vulnerability in her words struck a chord deep within me. For all our differences, for all the years of competition and distance, Caroline and I shared the same wounds, the same fears. You don't have to be like her, I said softly. That's the thing I'm just starting to understand. We get to choose what kind of mothers we become. How can you be so sure? She asked. After everything they've done to you, how can you be so hopeful? I glanced toward the living room, where James still slept, then toward the nursery where Noah would soon wake. Because I've seen what real love looks like, I answered honestly. And once you've seen it, you can't settle for anything less. Not for yourself, and especially not for your child. The silence that followed felt different, thoughtful rather than awkward. Mom and Dad are furious, she finally said. They're saying you've turned your back on the family, that you're being manipulated by your husband. I couldn't help but laugh softly. Of course they are. That's easier than admitting they were wrong. Richard, my fiancé, he saw everything. Caroline continued. He hasn't said much, but I can tell he was disturbed. He kept asking questions on the way home, about why Mom would hit a baby, about why Dad didn't step in. The fact that Richard had questioned it gave me a glimmer of hope for my sister. Perhaps she had chosen better than I'd given her credit for. What did you tell him? I asked. The truth, she said, surprising me again. That it's how Mom has always been. That it's how we were raised. That I never questioned it until last night, I finished for her. Until I saw it through his eyes, she corrected. Until I imagined it happening to my baby. The baby monitor on the counter lit up with Noah's morning sounds, not crying yet, just the gentle vocalizations he made as he transitioned from sleep to wakefulness. My son is waking up, I said. I need to go. Ellie, wait, Caroline said quickly. Can I see you? Today, I mean. I know it's Christmas and you probably have plans, but I need to talk to someone who understands. I hesitated, protective instincts flaring. I don't know, Caroline. After last night, just me, she interrupted. Not Mom and Dad. Just me. Please. The desperation in her voice was so unlike the confident sister I'd grown up with. I thought about all the times I'd wished for an ally in that house, someone who could validate that what was happening wasn't normal or right. Let me talk to James, I said finally. I'll text you. Thank you, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. I ended the call just as James appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes alert with concern. Everything okay? He asked, glancing at the phone in my hand. I poured 2 cups of coffee, buying myself a moment to organize my thoughts. That was Caroline. She wants to come over today. Alone. James accepted the mug I offered, studying my face. And how do you feel about that? Confused, I admitted. She's pregnant. And she's scared of becoming our mother. Understanding dawned in his eyes. That would shake anyone's worldview. She said what Mom did was wrong, I continued, still processing the conversation. Caroline has never disagreed with our parents about anything. James sipped his coffee thoughtfully. People can surprise you. Sometimes it takes seeing something from a new perspective to recognize the truth that was always there. Noah's vocalizations grew more insistent through the monitor. James set down his mug. I'll get him, he said. You take a minute. I watched him go, gratitude washing over me for this man who always seemed to know exactly what I needed. Then I reached for my phone and sent Caroline a text, come at 2. Just you. Her response was immediate, thank you. I'll be there. James returned. With Noah, who looked even more perfect in the morning light, his blue eyes wide and curious as he took in the Christmas decorations he hadn't seen the night before. Merry Christmas, little man, James cooed, gently bouncing him. You're first. 1. What do you think? Noah responded with a happy gurgle, his tiny hand reaching for the twinkling lights on the tree. I told Caroline she could come over at 2, I said, watching their interaction with a full heart. James nodded, not taking his eyes off our son. Are you okay with that? After everything that happened? I considered the question carefully. I think I need to hear what she has to say. And maybe she needs to hear what I have to say too. He smiled then, looking up at me with pride in his eyes. You're amazing, you know that? After the way they've treated you, most people wouldn't even consider opening that door again. I shrugged, though his words warmed me. She's having a baby. That changes things. It sure does, he agreed, looking down at Noah with infinite tenderness. We spent the morning in a peaceful bubble of our own making. James insisted on making breakfast, his famous French toast that I'd been craving for months, while I fed Noah. We opened the few gifts we'd managed to get for each other, plus the unexpected bounty from James's team. Noah received more presents than seemed possible for someone who had only existed for 6 weeks. Tiny outfits, soft toys, books to be read in quiet moments. James had brought him a stuffed eagle wearing miniature army fatigues, which made me laugh through tears. His first official military gear, James explained with mock seriousness. Very important for morale. For me, besides the locket, James had somehow managed to have a beautiful leather-bound journal delivered, embossed with my initials. Inside, he'd written a note on the first page, for all the stories you'll tell him. For all the memories we'll make. I love you both beyond words. I'd given James a watch to replace the one he'd lost on his last deployment, engraved with the coordinates of our home and Noah's birth date. When he opened it, his eyes had gone suspiciously bright. So you always know where home is, I explained. So you always have a map back to us. He'd kissed me then, a kiss that held promises of 1,000 tomorrows. At 1:30, I found myself growing anxious about Caroline's visit. I busied myself tidying the already clean living room, adjusting the pillows, straightening the tree ornaments. It's going to be fine, James assured me, gently taking a throw blanket from my hands before I could fold it for the 3rd time. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. I nodded, grateful for his steadying presence. I know. I just never thought I'd be having this conversation with Caroline, of all people. People can change, he reminded me. Sometimes they just need a reason. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. Caroline had always been punctual, one of our mother's non-negotiable rules. I took a deep breath and went to answer it, James hanging back in the living room with Noah to give us space. Caroline stood on our porch looking nothing like the polished, confident woman I was used to seeing. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual perfect blowout. She wore jeans and a sweater rather than one of her designer outfits. And her eyes, usually so like our mother's in their cool assessment, were red-rimmed and uncertain. Hi, she said softly, clutching a gift bag in front of her like a shield. Thank you for seeing me. I stepped back to let her in, noticing the way her eyes widened slightly as she took in our modest home. Not with judgment, as I might have expected, but with something like curiosity. It's nice, she said, seeming to mean it. It feels like people actually live here. Coming from Caroline, this was high praise. Our parents' house had always been more showroom than home, with rooms we weren't allowed to enter and furniture we weren't permitted to sit on. James stood as we entered the living room, Noah cradled securely in his arms. Merry Christmas, Caroline, he said, his tone polite but reserved. Merry Christmas, she replied, her eyes drawn to the baby. Is this Noah? I nodded, watching her face carefully. Would you like to sit down? She perched on the edge of our couch, setting the gift bag carefully on the coffee table. I brought something for Noah, she explained. And for you both. James sat beside me in the armchair, Noah still contentedly nestled against him. The contrast between this scene and last night's dinner couldn't have been more stark. I don't even know where to begin, Caroline said after a moment of awkward silence. Last night was. She trailed off, shaking her head. I've never seen Mom like that. I have, I said quietly. Many times. Caroline's eyes snapped to mine, shock evident in her expression. What? When? Growing up, I explained. When you weren't around. When I didn't measure up to her standards. She hit you? Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes, I confirmed. But mostly it was words. Constant criticism. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Caroline looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. I never knew. I swear, Ellie, I never knew it was that bad. You were her golden child, I said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. You did everything right, at least in her eyes. I was the disappointment. That's not true, she protested weakly. Caroline, I said gently, you went to the college she picked for you. You dated the men she approved of. You majored in business like Dad wanted. You never questioned anything they said or did. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked up with tears in her eyes. I was scared, she admitted. I saw how they treated you when you pushed back, when you wanted to do things your way. I didn't want that to happen to me. The admission hung in the air between us. For the first time, I saw my sister not as my mother's clone or my childhood rival, but as another survivor of the same toxic environment. I understand, I said softly. You did what you had to do. Noah chose that moment to fuss, squirming against James's chest. I think he's hungry, James said, handing him to me carefully. I settled Noah to nurse, using the light blanket we kept draped over the arm of the chair for privacy. Caroline watched the process with undisguised fascination. Does it hurt? She asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Sometimes, I answered honestly. At first, especially. But it's also special. This connection. That only the two of us share. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'm 12 weeks along, she said. We weren't planning it. Richard and I were going to wait until after the wedding, but... She shrugged. Life had other plans. Have you told Mom and Dad? I asked. No, she replied quickly. Richard wanted to, last night at dinner, but after what happened. She shook her head. I'm glad we didn't. I keep thinking about what Mom would have said, how she would have taken over everything like she always does. James excused himself tactfully, mentioning something about checking on dinner, giving us space to talk more freely. He seems like a good man, Caroline observed once he'd left the room. Your husband. He is, I said simply. The best I've ever known. I was wrong about him, she admitted, surprising me again. We all were. When you started dating him, Mom said he was just using you, that he wanted the Blake name and connections. And I believed her. The old hurt stirred, but less sharply than it once would have. You didn't know him. I didn't try to know him, she corrected. I just accepted what Mom said, like I always did. Noah finished nursing, and I shifted him to my shoulder to burp him. Caroline watched the practiced movement with interest. You're good at that, she said. Being a mother. The compliment, so simple yet so profound, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'm figuring it out as I go, I said. But I know what kind of mother I don't want to be. Caroline's expression grew serious. That's why I needed to see you. I keep having these moments of panic, thinking that I'm going to turn into her. That I don't know how to be any other way. You don't have to be like her, I said firmly. That's what I'm learning. We can choose a different path. How? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. How do you unlearn a lifetime of whatever that was? I considered the question carefully, bouncing Noah gently as he settled against my shoulder. I think it starts with seeing it for what it was, I finally said. Recognizing that what happened to us wasn't normal or healthy or loving. Caroline nodded slowly. Last night, when Mom hit Noah, then you. Richard was horrified. On the way home, he kept saying, people don't do that. Families don't treat each other that way. And I realized that in his family, they don't. They disagree, they argue sometimes, but they don't hurt each other. James is the same way, I said. His family has their issues, but they talk them out. They apologize when they're wrong. They put each other first. I want that, Caroline whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. For my baby. For me and Richard. I don't want to continue whatever this is that Mom and Dad created. I reached out my free hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Caroline took it. Her fingers were cold against mine, trembling slightly. Then don't, I said simply. Make different choices. See a therapist. I started going when I found out I was pregnant. Create boundaries with Mom and Dad. Put your child's emotional well-being ahead of appearances or expectations. They'll be furious, she said, though without the fear such a statement would have held for us in the past. If I don't let them control everything, if I don't raise this baby their way. Probably. I agreed. But you'll have to decide what matters more, their approval or your child's happiness. Caroline squeezed my hand, her eyes fixed on Noah's peaceful face. He's beautiful, Ellie. Perfect. He is, I agreed. And so worth standing up for. She released my hand and reached for the gift bag she'd brought. I got this for him yesterday, before everything. I wasn't sure if I should still give it to you, but I accepted the bag with my free hand. Inside was a soft, handmade blanket in shades of blue and green. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched. I didn't get it at some expensive boutique, she said, a hint of pride in her voice. I found it at a little shop downtown, run by a local artist. I liked that it was unique. That no one else would have one exactly like it. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Caroline, who had always worn what our mother deemed appropriate, who had furnished her apartment straight from the pages of design magazines our mother approved of, had chosen something individual. Something that spoke to her own taste rather than our mother's. He'll love it, I assured her. Thank you. She bit her lip, hesitating before reaching into the bag again. There's something else. For you and James. The envelope she handed me contained a gift certificate for a weekend at a nearby mountain resort, known for its luxurious spa and breathtaking views. It includes childcare, she added quickly. If you want it. Or you could take Noah with you. I just thought, you both deserve a break. Some time together. I was speechless for a moment, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Caroline, this is too much. She shook her head. It's not enough, really. Not after everything. But it's a start, maybe? I understood what she was really asking, if this could be the beginning of a new relationship between us, one built on genuine care rather than competition or obligation. It's a perfect start, I assured her. James returned then, carrying a tray with mugs of hot chocolate and a plate of the cookies his mother had sent in her Christmas package. Hope I'm not interrupting, he said, setting the tray on the coffee table. Not at all, I replied, smiling up at him. Caroline was just giving us an amazing gift. A weekend away at Pine Ridge Resort. His eyebrows rose in appreciation. That's incredibly generous. Thank you. Caroline seemed pleased by his reaction. It's the least I could do. She hesitated, then added, I also wanted to apologize. For last night, for not speaking up when Mom and Dad were being cruel, for all of it, really. James nodded, his expression softening. Family dynamics are complicated. I understand that better than most. Still, she insisted, I should have done something. Said something. You're here now, I pointed out. That counts for a lot. She smiled, a genuine smile that reminded me of the sister I'd known before our parents' expectations had built walls between us. I want to do better, she said. Be better. For this baby, for myself. For us, if you'll let me try. I looked at James, who gave me a slight nod of encouragement. Then I looked down at Noah, peaceful in my arms, unaware of the healing taking place around him. I'd like that, I said honestly. It won't be easy, especially with Mom and Dad, but I'd really like to try. Relief washed over Caroline's face. Thank you, she whispered. I wasn't sure you'd even let me in today, after everything. That's what real family does, James said quietly. They open the door, even when it's hard. They make room at the table. They give second chances. Caroline blinked rapidly, clearly fighting tears. I'm learning that, she said. Slowly. We spent the next hour talking more openly than we ever had before. Caroline told us about her pregnancy, her fears, her hopes. I shared stories from Noah's first weeks, the challenges and the moments of transcendent joy. James added his perspective, making us laugh with tales from his own family's chaotic but loving holidays. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward pauses, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But it was real, and it was honest, and it felt like the beginning of something important. When it was time for Caroline to leave, she hugged me tightly, whispering, Thank you for showing me another way. I watched from the doorway as she walked to her car, her posture a little straighter, her steps a little lighter. James stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, Noah secure in his portable bassinet nearby. You did a good thing today, he murmured against my hair. I leaned back into his strength, watching as Caroline's car disappeared down our snowy street. I just gave her what someone should have given me a long time ago, I said. The truth about our family, and the hope that it could be different. James turned me in his arms, his eyes serious. You're changing the story, Ellie. For Noah, for Caroline's baby, for generations to come. That's a powerful gift. As we closed the door against the winter chill, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations with my parents, boundaries to establish and maintain, old wounds that might never fully heal. But today, on Noah's first Christmas, something new had begun. A different kind of family was taking shape, one built on love rather than fear, on acceptance rather than performance, on truth rather than appearance. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. 3 days after Christmas, my phone rang. I was changing Noah's diaper, so James answered it from the kitchen where he was preparing lunch. Ellie, he called, his voice carefully neutral, it's your father. My hand stilled momentarily before I finished securing Noah's diaper. I hadn't heard from either of my parents since Christmas Eve. Part of me had expected angry calls or texts, accusations and demands for apologies. Their silence had been both a relief and strangely unsettling. I picked up Noah and carried him to the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. James held out the phone, his eyes asking the question he wouldn't voice aloud. Are you ready for this? I nodded, shifting Noah to my shoulder and taking the phone. Hello? Ellie. My father's voice sounded different, strained, perhaps even uncertain. So unlike his usual confident tone. We need to talk. I took a deep breath. I'm listening. Not over the phone, he said. Your mother and I would like to meet with you. And James, if he's willing. To discuss what happened. I glanced at James, who had moved close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. His expression was guarded but supportive. When? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Today, if possible, my father replied. At the house. I closed my eyes briefly, the memory of being thrown out into the snow still fresh. No, I said firmly. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. There was a pause, and I could almost see my father's jaw tightening in that way it did when he was challenged. But then he said, fine. There's a coffee shop downtown, Riverside Cafe. Would that work? Yes, I agreed. But not today. Tomorrow afternoon. I needed time to prepare myself, to think through what I wanted to say and what boundaries I needed to establish. 3 o'clock, he said, not quite a question. We'll be there, I confirmed, then ended the call before he could say anything else. I set the phone down on the counter and let out a long breath. James moved behind me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. You okay? He asked. I nodded slowly. I think so. Just surprised, I guess. I expected Mom to be the one to reach out, if anyone did. And I thought it would be to demand an apology, not to talk. What do you think they want? James asked, his thumbs working small circles at the base of my neck, easing the tension that had gathered there. I don't know, I admitted. But Caroline mentioned that Richard was asking questions after what happened. Maybe he said something to Dad. Noah made a small sound against my shoulder, and I bounced him gently, finding comfort in his warm weight. You don't have to go, James reminded me. We could call back and cancel. I considered this for a moment, then shook my head. No, I think I need to hear what they have to say. Not for them, but for me. For closure, if nothing else. James pressed a kiss to the top of my head. Then we'll go together. But we set the terms, okay? We decide how long we stay, what we discuss, and we leave the moment it becomes unproductive. Agreed, I said, leaning back against his solid strength. No more letting them dictate the terms of our relationship. The rest of the day passed. In a blur of normal activities, feeding Noah, doing laundry, watching a movie with James on the couch. But underneath the routine tasks, my mind was racing, rehearsing what I might say to my parents, preparing for their potential reactions. That night, as we lay in bed, Noah sleeping peacefully in his bassinet beside us, I voiced my biggest fear. What if nothing changes? I whispered into the darkness. What if they're just trying to save face or regain control? James was quiet. For a moment, his hand finding mine under the covers. Then we'll know, he said simply. And we'll make our decisions based on that knowledge. I want Noah to have grandparents who love him, I confessed. Real love, not the conditional kind we grew up with. He already has that in my parents, James reminded me gently. And if your parents can't or won't change, that's their loss. Not his. I nodded against his shoulder, knowing he was right but still feeling that familiar ache, the child inside me who had never stopped hoping for her parents' unconditional love. Whatever happens tomorrow, James continued, remember that you've already broken the cycle. You're giving Noah what you never had. That's the victory, no matter what they say or do. His words settled over me like a blanket, warm and comforting. I drifted off to sleep with my hand still in his, anchored by his steady presence. The next day dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off the snow that still blanketed our yard. I dressed with unusual care, choosing a soft blue sweater that James had once said brought out my eyes. Not to impress my parents, but to remind myself that I was no longer the intimidated daughter desperate for their approval. We arranged for Sarah to watch Noah, a decision we'd made after careful consideration. This first meeting needed to be about establishing boundaries and expectations, not about introducing our son into a potentially volatile situation. Are you sure you don't want me to drive? James asked as I grabbed my keys. I shook my head. I need to do this. To drive there on my own terms, not be driven like a child going to the principal's office. He nodded in understanding, his hand warm on the small of my back as we walked to the car. The drive to Riverside Cafe took 20 minutes, during which neither of us spoke much. James respected my need for mental preparation, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand but otherwise giving me space with my thoughts. We arrived 10 minutes early, a deliberate choice to claim our territory, to be settled and calm when my parents arrived. The cafe was cozy, with exposed brick walls and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee. We chose a table in the back corner, away from the main traffic flow, where our conversation wouldn't be easily overheard. James ordered coffee for both of us, his steady presence beside me a constant reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. At precisely 3 o'clock, the door opened, and my parents walked in. They looked oddly diminished somehow, less imposing than they had always seemed in my memory. My mother's hair was perfectly styled as always, her cashmere coat immaculate. But her face seemed drawn, tired. My father, usually so commanding in his custom suits, appeared almost uncertain as his eyes scanned the cafe and landed on us. They approached our table with measured steps. James and I remained seated, another small but deliberate choice. We wouldn't rise for them as if they were royalty gracing us with their presence. Ellie. James. My father nodded to each of us. In turn. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the empty chairs across from us. They sat down, my mother arranging herself with practiced grace, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she unbuttoned her coat. A waitress appeared, taking their drink orders before tactfully withdrawing. The four of us sat in uncomfortable silence until she returned with their beverages, black coffee for my father, herbal tea for my mother. Well, my father said once she had gone, I suppose we should address what happened on Christmas Eve. I waited, saying nothing. This was their meeting, let them be the ones to begin. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have had several difficult conversations since then. With each other, with Caroline, and with Richard, who was quite disturbed by what he witnessed. My mother stared down at her teacup, her usual imperious expression noticeably absent. I want to be clear, my father continued, his voice carefully measured. What happened was unacceptable. Your mother's actions toward Noah, and toward you, were wrong. I blinked in surprise. In all my life, I had never heard my father admit that my mother had done anything wrong. I should never have struck the child, my mother said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Or you. It was inexcusable. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation or calculation I had come to expect, but found only what appeared to be genuine discomfort and regret. Why did you? I asked, the question simpler than all the others crowding my mind. My mother's eyes met mine briefly before darting away. I was angry. Embarrassed. The baby was disrupting the dinner I had planned for months. You were challenging me in front of our guests. She paused, then added more quietly, but those aren't reasons. They're excuses. James's hand found mine under the table, a silent show of support. This isn't just about Christmas Eve, I said carefully. This is about a pattern that's existed my entire life. About the way you've always treated me as if I were somehow less worthy of love and respect than Caroline. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We've always wanted what's best for you, Ellie. No, I countered, my voice firm but not angry. You've always wanted what you thought was best for the Blake family image. Those are very different things. My mother flinched slightly, but didn't contradict me. Caroline told us she's pregnant. My father said, changing tactics. She also mentioned that the two of you had spoken on Christmas Day. I nodded. We did. She said some concerning things, he continued. About your childhood. About experiences you had that she wasn't aware of. I felt a flicker of anxiety, wondering exactly what Caroline had shared, but I pushed it aside. I told her the truth. About growing up as the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up to your expectations. That's not how we saw it, my mother interjected. How did you see it, then? I asked, genuinely curious despite myself. She looked at my father, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. You were always different, she said, as if choosing her words with unusual care. Independent. Questioning. Caroline accepted our guidance, but you always pushed back. And that made me less worthy of love? I asked, the hurt of decades creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. No, my father said quickly. Not less worthy. Just more challenging. So you responded to that challenge with criticism, with coldness, with punishment? I pressed, not letting them off the hook. With sitting me away from the family. At holiday dinners? With ignoring my accomplishments because they weren't the ones you'd chosen for me? My mother's eyes filled with tears, something I had seen so rarely that it momentarily stunned me into silence. We didn't know how to handle you, she admitted. My parents raised me to believe that children should be obedient, should follow the path set out for them. When you didn't, I took it as a personal failure. And I responded badly. Very badly, I agreed, not to be cruel but because the truth needed acknowledgement. Richard asked us something the other night, my father said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. He asked if we loved our grandchild more than our own pride. It was a difficult question to hear. And what was your answer? James asked, speaking for the first time since my parents had arrived. My father looked at him directly. That's why we're here. Because the answer has to be yes, though we haven't always acted like it. I sat back in my chair, processing this unexpected turn. In all the scenarios I had imagined for this meeting, genuine self-reflection from my parents hadn't been among them. What are you hoping to achieve here today? I asked, wanting clarity before we proceeded any further. My Parents exchanged a glance before my father spoke again. We want a relationship with you, with James, and with our grandson. We recognize that things need to change for that to be possible. What kind of changes? I pressed, needing specifics, not vague promises. Boundaries, my mother said, surprising me with her directness. Caroline explained the concept to us. That you have the right to set limits on how we interact with you and your family. We're also. My father hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. We've started seeing a family counselor. At Richard's suggestion. To help us understand where we've gone wrong and how we might do better. I stared at them in disbelief. My parents, who had always dismissed therapy as something for weak people who couldn't handle their own problems, were voluntarily seeing a counselor? I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't need to say anything right now, my father replied. We don't expect immediate forgiveness or trust. We haven't earned either. But we would like a chance, my mother added, her voice steadier. Now. To be better grandparents than we were parents. To learn from our mistakes. I looked at James, whose expression remained cautiously neutral, though his eyes told me he would support whatever decision I made. I need time to think about this, I said finally. This isn't what I expected from today's meeting. Of course, my father nodded. Take all the time you need. And I want to be very clear about something, I continued, finding strength in James's steady presence beside me. If, and it's a big if, we decide to allow you back into our lives, there will be non-negotiable conditions. We understand, my mother said, and I was struck by how different she looked without the mask of superiority she usually wore. Older, yes, but also somehow more human. Noah is our priority, I stated firmly. His emotional well-being comes before anything else, before your feelings, before appearances, before family traditions. If you ever again speak to him or treat him the way you've spoken to and treated me, that will be the end of any relationship. They both nodded, my father's expression solemn, my mother's eyes still bright with unshed tears. And I'm not the insecure daughter desperate for your approval anymore, I added. I'm a mother, a wife, a whole person who doesn't need you to validate her worth. I'd like you to be part of our lives, but we will be fine if you can't meet these conditions. For a moment, no one spoke. The cafe bustled around us, customers coming and going, unaware of the seismic shift occurring at our small corner table. We will try, my father said eventually. We can't promise perfection, but we can promise effort. That's a start, I acknowledged, still cautious but feeling the first tentative stirrings of hope. We spent another hour talking, more openly and honestly than we ever had before. My parents asked about Noah, about his birth, about his personality already emerging. At such a young age. They listened without interrupting as I shared stories of his first smile, his preference for being sung to, the way he studied our faces with such intense concentration. My mother asked, with what seemed like genuine interest, about my plans for returning to work, about the writing I'd been doing during my maternity leave, about the career I'd built that had nothing to do with the family business. My father engaged James in conversation about his military service, about his promotion, about his family background, not with the dismissive condescension of the past, but with what appeared to be real respect. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. Once, when my mother began to offer unsolicited advice about Noah's feeding schedule, she caught herself mid-sentence, took a breath, and instead asked, "What approach has been working for you?" It was a small moment, but it signaled a willingness to change that I hadn't believed possible. As we prepared to leave, my mother reached hesitantly into her handbag and withdrew a small, wrapped package. "This is for Noah," she said, placing it on the table between us. "If you think it's appropriate." I accepted the package with a nod, not opening it but acknowledging the gesture. "Thank you." Outside the cafe, standing in the crisp winter air, my father turned to us with an uncharacteristic awkwardness. "Would it be possible," he asked carefully, "to see Noah sometime? When you're ready, of course." I exchanged a glance with James, who gave a slight nod, deferring to my judgment. "We'll think about it," I promised. "Maybe in a few weeks, once we've had time to process everything." My mother nodded, disappointment visible in her eyes but accepting the boundary. "That's fair." We said our goodbyes without the forced hugs or air kisses that had been the norm at family gatherings. Instead, there was a simple acknowledgement, a meeting of eyes, a nod of heads, a tentative step towards something new. As we drove home, James kept glancing at me, concern evident in his expression. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. I stared out at the winter landscape, snow-covered and beautiful in the late afternoon light. "Confused," I admitted. "Cautiously optimistic. A little afraid to hope." "That all sounds appropriate," he said with a small smile. "Did you believe them?" I asked, turning to study his profile. Their apologies, their promises to change? James considered the question seriously before answering. I believe they want to try, he said finally. Whether they can actually do it, that remains to be seen. I nodded, looking down at the small package in my lap. Should I open this now? That's up to you, he said. We can wait until we get home if you prefer. I hesitated, then carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a silver frame, elegantly simple. And within it, a photograph I had never seen before, my mother holding me as a newborn, looking down at my face with an expression of pure, unguarded love. I don't remember ever seeing her look at me that way, I whispered, tracing the edge of the frame with my fingertip. Maybe she's trying to tell you something, James suggested quietly. That she did love you, once, before expectations and appearances got in the way. I studied the image, this glimpse of a mother I had never known, of a relationship that might have been. It's not enough, I said finally. A photograph from 30 years ago doesn't erase decades of hurt. No, James agreed. But maybe it's a place to start. A reminder that underneath everything, there was once love. We pulled into our driveway, and I saw Sarah's car still parked outside. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. I need to see Noah, I said suddenly, an overwhelming urge to hold my son sweeping over me. James smiled in understanding. Me too. We found them in the living room, Sarah reading a board book to Noah, who was watching with rapt attention. Despite being far too young to understand the story. He turned at the sound of our entrance, his face lighting up with a toothless grin that squeezed my heart. I scooped him up, inhaling his sweet baby scent, feeling his tiny body curl trustingly against mine. James thanked Sarah, who gathered her things and left with a cheerful wave. Alone with our son, we settled on the couch, Noah nestled between us. I placed the framed photograph on the coffee table, facing away from us. What do you think? James asked, following my gaze. About my parents, about trying again? I looked down at Noah, at his perfect face, at the absolute trust in his eyes as he looked up at me. I think we start small, I said. Careful steps. Strong boundaries. For his sake, not theirs. James nodded, his hand finding mine atop Noah's blanket. We'll do it together. And at the first sign that they're falling back into old patterns. We walk away, I finished firmly. No second chances when it comes to his well-being. Agreed, James said, leaning over to kiss my temple. Noah made a happy gurgling sound, his tiny hand batting at the locket around my neck, the one containing both their pictures, keeping them close to my heart. You know, I said softly, watching our son's face, in a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened on Christmas Eve. James raised an eyebrow, surprised. Grateful? I nodded slowly. If my mother hadn't shown her true colors so clearly, if she hadn't crossed that line, we might have continued in that toxic pattern indefinitely. Pretending everything was fine, accepting their conditional love, letting them think their behavior was acceptable. The breaking point, James murmured in understanding. Exactly, I said. It forced everyone to face the truth, me, them, Caroline. And now, whatever happens next, it will be with open eyes. Outside our window, the last light of day painted the snow in shades of pink and gold. Inside, the warmth of our small home, of our small family, created a sanctuary of its own making. I didn't know what the future held with my parents, whether their apparent epiphany would lead to lasting change or prove to be another disappointment. But I did know, with absolute certainty, that Noah would grow up differently than I had. He would know unconditional love. He would understand that his worth wasn't tied to his achievements or his obedience. He would be valued simply for being himself. And that knowledge gave me peace, regardless of what tomorrow might bring. I love you, James said, his voice low and certain. Both of you. More than anything. I leaned into his strength, Noah secure between us, and felt the truth of his words wrap around us like a shield. We love you too. In that moment, surrounded by the family we had created, I knew that the cycle had truly been broken. The pain of the past couldn't be erased, but it had lost its power to determine our future. Whatever relationship evolved with my parents would be on new terms, with clear boundaries and expectations. And if they couldn't meet those standards, we would be okay. More than okay, we would be whole, complete in ourselves and in each other. Look, James whispered, pointing to Noah's face. Our son had fallen asleep, his expression peaceful, one tiny hand still clutching my locket. In the quiet of our living room, with snow falling gently outside and the last light of day fading into evening, I felt a certainty settle in my bones. This was the family I had always longed for, not perfect, not without challenges, but built on a foundation of genuine love and respect. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.